Loco.
And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile application development, desktop application development, cross-platform development using Corona SDK. I'm your
Everything's
host.
about time.
I know it. I know it. It's crazy world. This crazy, crazy world. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today we are going to continue our desktop development series. We've been developing a game, a desktop game, and today we're going to implement some player navigation and some other things. If you haven't seen the other shows, you definitely need to go over to youtube.com/coronageek and check those out. We've had 3 or 4 episodes now where we've talked about things like, keyboard input, mouse input, desktop configuration, what your project should look like, where you can get third-party assets for your games, and how those should be implemented, and just a wealth of information on desktop development. So if you're into that thing, you want to kind of explore, get outside of the mobile space, go check that out. All the source code is provided. You can download it, free of charge. Joining us on the panel today is Dr. Burton down in Abilene. You can find all of his books and materials over at burtonsmediagroup.com. Also joining us is Ed Marina from roaminggamer.com.
I know you want to say it.
Oh, God. Well, I so want to say something about your headphones. M-I-C-K-E-Y.
Hey, no jokes about the headphones, man.
That's right. Also joining us is Stephen from Evolvo Studios. Hey, Stephen, how are things going with what was it? Militant, which is a play on the word ant, which is where I was going. Yeah, Militant.
Yeah,
how's that going?
It's going well. We're at the very end of the project, so it's all the exciting stuff is kind of out of the way. We're just fixing, iterating, fixing some more.
So this is where the real work begins, right? Yeah, it was all fun, all parties, lots of cake and cupcakes and unicorns, and now you're just like, oh, I'm so tired of this.
It's always unicorns in the beginning. Speaking of unicorns, have you seen that new commercial? YouTube commercial?
No, I haven't.
Unicorns, ice cream cones. Look it up.
Okay, I will do that.
It's horrible. It's by the people who made. I'm pretty sure it's by the same people who made Poo-Pourri.
Oh, nice.
That'll set you up for what's going on there.
Yeah, that's a clear indication as to what to expect.
Yeah, not
sure.
safe for work. Okay.
Right.
I personally don't think so. They probably say it is, but
yeah. Yeah, I work from home, and it's probably not safe for work.
Yeah, my mind was blown. I just stood mouth open. Anyways, carry on.
I don't know. I showed it in my classes as an appropriate form of entertaining commercials.
Oh, there you go. Viral. The formula for viral.
A commercial you can't believe is real.
Right.
Exactly. And somewhere between viral and just what do you call it, like jaw dropping, like you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a fine line between that.
Right. They tread the line very close, very near that line.
Well, before we get started, does anybody? I mean, we talked about Militant. Brian, do you have anything to announce, or Ed, do you have anything?
I do, but Brian, go first.
Okay. Well, I am working on revising the beginning mobile app development and learning mobile app development textbooks. So hoping by the first of the year have something ready to go on that. But if anyone has suggestions or has found an error or something like that, I'd appreciate just a quick email telling me what you found or the problem you saw, and I'll get that fixed for the next revision.
Awesome. Yeah. And anybody who's listening, if you're new to this conversation, burtonsmediagroup.com, go check it out. Brian is fantastic about updating his books. If you buy an advanced copy of his book, you'll get an updated version when it comes out, and then he continues to update it over and over again. Brian, when are you going to turn this into come on, Ed, help me with it, Patreon campaign? When are you going to turn it into a...
I will probably turn it into a Patreon campaign at the same time that I release the update.
Oh, really? Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I thought that way I can put the announcement in the message that goes out, and anybody that wants to support these efforts can do it. And you get the updated product in your hand at the same time. So I thought that it'd be nice if the two went together.
Yeah. I know I'm looking forward to that then, because I know personally I want to be on the list of supporters,
I
because
appreciate that.
the value that's come from you over the last few years, has been phenomenal, and you've never asked for another dime apart from the purchase of the book, right? And that's a great consumer model, but it's not something that is sustainable by the content creator, as most
Well,
mobile.
what we're seeing is that Corona is becoming more and more popular, and that's what I'm hopeful for, and that it continues. And I am working on a more intermediate level textbook as well that looks more at databases and cloud computing and how we can use more advanced features that a lot of people are interested in that I just didn't have space or time to go into in the first book.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before, but I think that's where books should go, right? I mean, you buy a book, even a digital book, you buy it and it's out of date,
Yeah.
especially in the software space where things
Right.
change all the time. So it makes sense that it should be almost a crowd-funded, crowd-supported sort of endeavor, and then that thing is just evergreen. It just gets updated, as needed. So.
Right, and I think that's where we need to go in technical books. I know a lot of traditional publishers are, well, they're all about the profit margin. I'm an academic, I care about making sure people learn how to use it, but I do have bills to pay, so any support is always appreciated.
Exactly. All right, very good. BurtonsMediaGroup.com. Go check it out. Ed, what do you?
I don't know what it is, man. If it's the daylight savings time or these Mickey Mouse headphones, but now I'm sleepy. I swear to, if I fall asleep, you guys are gonna have to yell really loud. Okay, what? My announcement is sort of related to today's work. Later this week there will be first of all, let me know if I'm talking too loud too. Later this week there will be a release of SSK. I'm not used to this headphone thing at all. So, but I have been debating this for a while, and I had a discussion with somebody that I've been working with, and they gave me input on this that led me in this direction. And the direction that I'm going is I will no longer be trying to get people to use SSK. It will purely be something that I release to the public. It'll still be available, but it's going to be my own personal library, because I haven't seen a lot of adoption of SSK. Some people are using it. In fact, I get emails occasionally about it. But I get the most benefit out of it, it seems, and so I'm going to maintain it for myself primarily. So there's a world of things in there you should take a look at, consider. But I totally understand that people don't want to use it or all of it because it's big, it's hard to get into if you're new. I understand all that. But so there'll be a new release. I'm not going to maintain any docs or anything like that from here on out. So.
Okay, I think that's fair. I mean, you put a lot of work and effort into it, try to make it usable for other people. And if you don't feel like that's happening, then yeah, most of the value should stay with you.
Well, there was a split for a while too, like the public release and my private release, and I'm sick of doing that. So I'm just going to do a full release. It's going to be all out there. There's a lot of other stuff in here that hasn't been seen yet. So people should take a look at it, and if they can figure out how to use it, awesome. I'll still be using it to do examples and stuff. Not so much for this show, but answers for the forums and such.
Yeah, that would make more sense, right? If we're doing it for this show, kind of like, hey, here's this thing. It's not documented.
Yeah. No, but I will. On that note, the exploration part of our desktop enterprise here, let's call it that, is I get to do whatever I want to on that part because it's not really supposed to be. It's for us to explore and see the result of doing specific things. And in order for me to do that, I have to be able to code rapidly. So I'm using SSK for that. But when we do the game, which we're starting the actual game today, where we're going to start taking components out and doing them longhand, I will do everything longhand so that people who are not using SSK, don't want to use SSK, can still get into it and use it. It'll be standard Corona.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I would encourage people to follow your lead though, and even if they don't want to use your library, to maintain their own, because there's a lot of shortcuts that you can apply on your own time that, like you said, become very beneficial to you, and you know how to use them, and you don't really need to communicate them out to anybody else. It's about a speed and efficiency on your end. So look at what Ed's done in the past and and the concept that he's talked about, and apply those to your own workflow.
Yes. Well, and I've got to say that, if you haven't looked at Ed's SSK, you should. The time savings that Ed has built into this, even if you're not using the entire SSK, there's bits and pieces that you were going to want to use in projects that will dramatically speed up your development, and just simply great coding practices to adopt for your own development. And I point my students to what Ed's created as great examples of modules and things to include in what they're doing. I use a lot of Ed's modules in the development that I do. So this is really great stuff, and you shouldn't ignore or recreate the wheel. That's just silliness.
Yeah, leave that up to me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you've talked about that before, that you leave SSK fairly modular, though, right? So you can pull out pieces of it and not have to use.
You can pretty much take out any part that you want. I mean, you simply just go into the load SSK file, which is under the SSK folder. You start commenting out things, and when it stops working, you need that part. But I mean, most of the parts are standalone. I've tried to make individual components, like the camera component, the other components, all standalone. You can take them out and run them by themselves.
Now, let me ask you this, and this is kind of a side note to what we're going to talk about today, but have you thought about making a version available to Patreon supporters? Right? I mean, or let me just ask it a different way. Would there ever be a time or an instance where you would consider doing something like that? If there were enough backing for it, would you?
Yeah, if I got enough requests for it, or enough people who said, hey, I'm using it, or I really want to use it, but I can't quite figure it out, then I might consider it. But the sense that I get is not a lot of usage.
Okay.
And it's kind of hard to quantize that, but.
Well, that's good. No, but so here's a reason I ask, and if you're listening to this show or watching it on YouTube, here's what I'd say: you need to go to roaminggamer.com, and you need to let Ed know if you are using his SSK. If you're using his super starter kit for Corona, you need to let him know, because one of the things that even Corona deals with, right? We don't require you to watermark your apps or to do anything that denotes that it's a Corona app, right? So some of the times it's very hard to know what apps are out there that are made with Corona, and unless somebody steps up and says, "Hey, I made this app," or "We got featured," or whatever, right? And so, yeah, it would be very hard to know, like, oh well, we don't feel like people are using this feature or using whatever. And as you sounds like you're in that zone where I think I feel like we've had people in the past who have been interested or who have expressed their usage of SSK, but you don't have numbers on that. So
yeah, I'm not saying that people don't use it. I just can't quantize it. And my sense is that it's not in the hundreds. If it were in the hundreds, even over 100 people were using it, then I would consider continuing to try to make it more publicly accessible.
Yeah. Now you moved it to GitHub, right? Didn't you?
Yeah, it's on GitHub. It's been on GitHub for several years. Actually, it's been on its current home for about 1.5 years on GitHub.
And you don't get any metrics from it there?
Not really. I mean, I don't really pay too much attention to them.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't. Okay, ask me a hard question.
It's all right.
Ask me a question where I should really know that answer.
Yeah, well,
do it right now. We're gonna go look at it.
I have a GitHub account. I use it for various things. I can't say that I'm a ninja at the analytics either. It just seems like it would be a place where you could go and kind of get a sense. I see there's like 28 people are watching it, 67 have started, and 19 have forked it. So, of course, those don't necessarily mean a whole lot, but they're just numbers, right? I mean, they're something.
Unfortunately, GitHub metrics take a minute to come in, so let's look at the traffic numbers. Yeah. So here's my visitor log. 60 views, 1025. So it looks like around.
Yeah, so 47 unique visitors.
Yeah, which one's the unique? Oh yeah, so basically it looks like we're doing around 2 to 6 a day.
Yeah. One of those is probably you.
That's one of those is probably me. It's true. I go in there, update it all the time. So, I
Okay.
access it. So,
Well, I think it's fair enough. I mean, so again, if you use it and you haven't expressed it, definitely drop Ed a line and let him know that you do. I think it would be worth knowing and worth if you need to turn it into a Patreon thing and people need to support you to continue it, then hey, all the better.
now, free stuff, on the other hand, gets a lot of visitors. My free stuff, yes.
Yeah, right.
So,
And I can see why.
I guess it's not that many, but the problem is on free stuff is I point people directly to the download links.
Right.
So it's
Do we put?
it's always the thing. How do you organize your content so people can find it?
Right. Exactly. The curse of information. So, is there? Do the free stuff packages? Do they have like? I know you have links to your website and stuff like that as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do I link back to my website?
Yeah. Do you mention SSK anywhere? I mean, I know you use SSK in all the files.
I mention SSK when I use it in these. But the free stuff archive is sort of like just a crazy grab bag of things. It's like mostly my answers on the forums, but sometimes it's a little bit of stuff here and there that for the show. Then there's a Corona Geek GitHub. Anyways.
Yeah, most of the time I just go in and I download the whole free stuff thing. I just get the whole zip, right?
That's what I tell people to anymore. Just go get the whole thing.
It's not that. I mean, it's
a big
decent
download,
size. Yeah, it's a decent size, but it's better than trying to pick through
a zillion. Yeah, I know. I won't go there. I already said it.
Okay.
I love GitHub, but sometimes it's not so good for maintaining big and sprawling projects where you want people to have access to individual components.
Yeah.
So, but on today, unless anybody else has anything else to say about announcements.
Oh, I just want to say one last thing, and that's that we're not going to have a Corona Geek After Dark this week. So that usually on every Tuesday night we're having them, and we're just going to take a little bit of a break. We'll come back next week. So if you're looking for that tomorrow night, you don't have to. You can go do something else.
You're allowed to go do something else.
You are allowed to go outside and be social.
No, that's not allowed.
Taking it too far, huh? Is that the line? We crossed the line.
We crossed the line on being social is unacceptable.
Hey, I went and looked at this guy's art packs and stuff like that, and it's a ton of stuff. I mean, and I was digging through it, and I was showing Max, my son, I was showing him like, hey, here are all the individual frames for making these characters do things, and he's even got 3D models and stuff up there, and I was like, here's a model of a goat, and the exploded, we call it the texture.
And everybody needs an animated meat model right here.
Why not? I mean, so.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. The thing is, this has been around forever. This is way back. I think he started this way back in the 90s. So, I mean, early. He did it with, I can't even remember the name of it. Some old, clunky 3D model tool it's not even around anymore.
Yeah.
And he used it to generate all these isometric sequences, and it was pretty cool back then. But now, as much as I love his collection, I kind of wish he had generated everything at like twice the resolution.
Mm.
Right?
Well, I'm sure I'm sure if you were to do everything today, somebody in the future would say the same thing about your collection.
No, I know. That's exactly the thought I had. Yeah, do it twice, but in a couple of years they'll say, well, why not twice again?
Yeah. Why? How come it's not in holodeck format?
How come it's not in holodeck format? Oh, for goodness sake. All right, so I'm doing an experiment today. I'm having a little problem with my desktop, so if things go wrong during the show, I will recover, but it may take me a moment. I've been having a problem crashing while I've been doing this, so bear with me if that happens. But if you can see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so last week where we were basically was we were exploring the Reiner models, which we were just talking about, and we were also talking about the Lost Garden collection for doing the backgrounds, which I'll show you in a minute. And last week we had green zombies and we had red zombies. So far I have added another set of, not zombies, but skeletons, archers. So skeleton archers, which don't do anything but walk at you at this point. And you can see them on the screen right now. They're not animated. I've got the simulator paused. And if I unpause it, and then I run, or I die. I could just do that instead. So, anyways, it looked pretty good. And in addition to what we had last week, I've been doing some experiments, killing myself. One thing that I did is I changed the animation, not the animation, but the movement, so that you only have forward movement. And I can't quite, I'm having some problems here. Bear with me. Forward movement, and then angular movement. Now, actually, the exploration model still allows you to walk backwards, but the game will only allow you to walk in the direction of your reticle. So as you're walking forward, you can just move your reticle, and it will change the direction you're walking, which makes more sense to me. You just dodge these guys. And then you'll see it here. It's probably a little bit hard to see on this resolution, but that was not the right key. Let's try that again. And there it is. So right here you can see we no longer have those green balls for our bullets. We're using arrows out of the Reiner's pack with little shadows. And we're not going to go over that code this week. This week we're going to start on the actual game development, but I just want to show you some of the things that are going to be coming up in our game as far as features, just so you know what's on the horizon. So let me start this again. When I was doing these arrows, one of the things that I experimented with, besides killing myself over and over and not navigating, is I added mass to the arrows, and then I used to have them be sensors, so they would go right through the zombies. Let's get a zombie out here. But now they have mass and they have feedback response, physics response, collision response. And so now they push the zombies back, which I kind of felt was a nicer effect.
Oh, nice.
So they're falling apart, falling backwards. And then that's all exciting, but let's turn these enemies off so I can stop dying. I'm doing this on the side here where you can't see it.
Is that kind of under what was that video that we saw? We discussed it several times. It was the making your video or making your game. Oh, the one where you shake the screen and it had all these different recommendations for making the game awesome. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah, you sent it to me and introduced it. Anyway, there was this YouTube video.
Yeah, right. All the little things you can add to your game. I know what you're talking about now, right?
Yeah.
To make games juicy.
Making the game juicy, yeah, because obviously when the arrow hits the zombies, they could just die, right? They could just either disappear or whatever, but that doesn't make it feel juicy.
Yeah, it didn't feel right. I mean, I didn't even notice it was wrong until I made a mistake of adding. I was changing the bullet to use the arrows, and I wrote the bullet making code again, which then I called arrow making code later, but still calling it bullets at the time. And I made a mistake when I was typing the code out. And then I was playing around, like, what's going on here? Why are these? Initially, when I did it, the zombies were like getting hit and thrown off the screen, which is too much. And I'm like, oh, hey, wait a minute. It's sort of like one of those happy accidents where you make a mistake, you see a result, and you go, hey, wait, that could be better. And then I played around with it for a while. I changed the masses of the zombies and I changed the masses of the arrows, and then I got that basic response that I was looking for, which was knockback, basically.
Yeah, nice.
So. But I like to think of that. I'm glad you brought that up because it's important to experiment in game development and keep track of happy mistakes, because I think a lot of interesting gameplay comes out of mistakes. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but in my personal experience, you can never plan out the game right the first time, and experiments and little mistakes you make sometimes add something very interesting to a game.
I like to doodle, and I feel the same way about creating little pieces of art. Sometimes just doodling is not necessarily headed in a particular direction, but then you'll come across some alignment of shapes, and you'll be like, ooh, that's kind of cool, right? And then you take that discovery into the next iteration of the thing, and then it just becomes this thing that you wouldn't have thought of right from the start with that blank sheet of paper or whatever, but it kind of builds on itself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Experimentation, making mistakes, that's important too. I say that, but then sometimes I just get wrapped up in experimenting all day long, and I never get anything done. So don't do that either. Just keep track of everything is the thing. Like with doodling, right? Do you keep okay, when you doodle, you're talking like physical copies or on the computer?
Both. I mean, I'm both. I have a journal here that I doodle in. Just your basic
So do you keep copies of all your doodle work? I know you do for your journal because it's
I
but
well, sometimes I do. I mean, I haven't reached the point where some people like open up their sketchbooks and they have like all these sketches that they do and stuff like that. I am truly in the sense of doodle. Like whenever I just draw on the edges of corners of pages. But on the one of the great things about drawing on the iPad or something like that is that it's got a gallery and it keeps those things over time, right? And so they're kind of all there. And I have a it sounds I don't want it to sound too fancy, but I have a portfolio of images that I've drawn over the years, and they're essentially just bigger doodles. But out of those items, I can point to anyone. Like I'm working on one on the iPad right now. That's is strictly in the sense of a doodle. It has no meaning or direction or anything. Every time I pick it up, it's I apply a different style to it, and but it's got some really great effects and some interesting ideas for the next thing, the next iteration of whatever it is that I'm gonna doodle.
Yeah, I keep trying to bring this back to aligning with what you're saying and what I do, which is I keep a collection of experiments.
Yeah, you're like a code doodler.
A large pile of literally called experiments, right? Just a folder with all kinds of weird things I've tried.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So speaking of experiments.
Yeah, if your dog did it in the carpet, you wouldn't want it, right? But it's good in code and it's good in art.
Okay, I'm not going to go there. That's just wrong. Some other things that we're going to be putting into our game. So the questions that I had to answer sort of in advance is what is the goal of this game? How do we advance in this game? What are we doing? So it's a top-down shooter. Our enemies are going to be zombies and archers and probably some other animals and bad guys out of the Reiner's pack. But besides having a bow and arrow, it would be kind of nice if we had some way to defend ourselves. So what I'm going to do is, as we go along, I'm going to add the ability to pick up items and then lay traps. And so what you're seeing here is all the different kinds of traps, except for this one here, which is a chest. So we got a spike trap. We got 3 different kinds of spike traps. We got a mouse trap, because everybody needs a mouse trap. We've got this spinning spiky thingy. And then we are seeing the 3 different states of the leaf trap, which is basically like it's going to be kind of like a magical effect. And then, of course, because every archer needs the heavy weaponry, we're going to have a laser turret. Don't ask me why there's a laser turret in this collection when it doesn't fit with the theme of anything else. But, I just saw that and I had to have it. So we're going to have laser turrets eventually in our
That's right.
top-down archer zombie shooter.
If the longbow arrow doesn't get you, I will melt your face off.
Exactly. And so the way this is going to work later is you'll see chests. Chests will get dropped by zombies that you kill, and you'll have to go over and pick them up. And different colored chests will give you different items. I may not use all of these items, but currently I think I'll be able to use them all. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure if I have 5 chests. I think I have 4. So we might have to give up one, which will probably be the mousetrap because it's the least cool of them. But you pick up the item, and what's going to happen is we will have a bar at the bottom or somewhere at the top that indicates how many items you've got. And then as you walk along, we'll be able to use a key sequence, like the tab key or something, to change our currently selected trap. And right-clicking will drop an instance of that trap. So let's say, for example, you had the spike. You got the spike, and you're walking along, and you got a zombie following you, and you would right-click, and then as you walk away, a spike trap would pop up and start working. And it would be there for a while, and any zombies that encountered it would get whacked, so to speak.
Nice.
Same thing for the one of my favorites, which is the spinning spike ball of death. And then what we'll do is we will have these give like different kill effects for like this spinning dealy bobber here. We'll probably throw them off in some direction. The leaf thing, probably just tear them apart or something. I don't know. We'll see. Whatever comes to mind at the time.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So I know you're putting these things on the screen in order to to speak to them and help everybody watching know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you generally take all these items and put them on the screen together to see how they bounce off of each other, see how they work with each other, or do you just sort of manually
If I'm going to
pick them?
experiment with an art pack like the Reiner kit or the Reiner pack, yeah, I definitely do. I put an instance of everything up so I can see it contextually and see if it makes sense or not.
Okay.
Because for me, I'm not much of an artist, and so I really got to see these things together. It's hard for me to look at the Reiner art page and go, yeah, those two will work together.
Yeah.
I got to see them in context.
I did kind of see that when I was going through the list there. I was like, ooh, there's an orc. Ooh, there's this. Ooh, there's a dragon. You know, like,
some of these things don't work.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the things I was like, I don't know if that's.
But the laser totally works.
Right.
The laser rocks.
Always.
That's all there is to it. Yeah, baby, lasers.
Laser beats no laser every time.
That's laser beats no laser every time. So, what else? Okay, one other thing I want to point out, and then we're going to jump into the actual game development, and that is, let me turn it on here. Lost Garden. I haven't worked this out yet, but I just want to show you how awesome this is. If I could just find the file, that'd be super. Lost Garden, where are you? Scripts. Lost Garden. It's always helpful if you have it open when you're trying to do this. The Lost Garden, I've taken 250 textures, which I am using as the background textures. Now, what you're seeing is just the one grass texture. Sorry, trying to turn this stuff all off here so we can actually see this in motion. And there is a huge rule set. Well, I wouldn't call it huge. There's a semi-complicated rule set for these textures because a lot of them can be used together, and you can create very interesting backgrounds. But just to give you an idea of how many different ones there are, go ahead and turn off the coloring. Okay, that should do it, hopefully. Yeah. All right. So what I've just done is I have turned on random selection of just any texture for each block. And every time I run this again, you'll see that there's a whole series of new textures.
Oh, wow.
And like I said, there are 250 of these, and they are meant to be used together. So there's all kinds of ways to stitch these together. But there is an algorithm that is necessary to make this automated, and I have not quite worked it out. And what I mean is, for example, if we're standing on this face right here, I don't know if you can see if that's a face underneath the reticle.
Yes.
So then the rule would be, if there's a face block here, then only certain textures can be used in these positions. And there's a way algorithmically to figure that out based on the names of the textures.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm going to go into it, but he's given this rule set, and I have to figure out how to put it into Lua so that it's automatic. So you can just like drag and drop a texture, and it automatically places a legal texture next to the current one, so that we can do this in an editor and we can generate nice backgrounds automatically.
Ed, I got a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
On your background image that for your tiling. Now the characters that you've pulled in from Reiner are all basically 2.5D. Or isometric, which
right.
I know there's a lot of interest in building isometric games, so everybody's really excited about seeing that. Are the textures that you're placing now they're currently in a square format? Normally we see isometric rotated to 120 degrees
right.
to get the
right. So these are not entirely suitable to this. Is that? Go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess that is where I'm headed with the question. I'm doing the academic long-winded question.
Okay.
How do we get the background to look as isometric as the characters, and is the background that you're using capable of doing that?
I'm going to say that the background that I'm going to be using here is not capable of doing that in a blockwise fashion, but you could certainly place these in a group and not a group. You could place these in one of the container types and change the aspect
right.
ratio.
That would do it.
That would, then you could make it seem as if it were. But the problem is because I'm going to make these screens significantly larger. I'm going to make the levels significantly larger.
Yes.
This texture set is not designed to be used in an isometric fashion. However, what you're seeing here is very stark, the differences. But if I flip it back the way it was, and then I go to this boring texture here, right? It suddenly becomes
semi-acceptable. It does look more isometric. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't really notice it. Yeah, it's definitely straight up and down. It has no aspect ratio. The other thing is we could experiment with if I can't figure this out, the algorithm, which is kind of hairy, and B, if we really want to put this all into isometric layout, Reiner's comes with a whole bunch of backgrounds.
Yes.
So he's already produced a bunch of these. So we could, in theory, use his isometric. The thing is, here's the trick, the rub. The rub with using isometric textures for backgrounds is math. You got to do the math right on the layout. It's not just simply placing them side by side.
Right.
There's angular differences, and you gotta. It's once you figure out the right steps, left, right, up, down, to place the textures, it's done. But you got to figure it out. So.
Yeah.
What do you guys?
Something that we might want to discuss in future after we get this project off of our plate is the use of isometrics in mobile and desktop. The tools that were being used are now very outdated, and there's still a huge interest in creating isometric style games. I think it would behoove us to further explore this issue.
Okay. Well, it's the whole background texturing thing is I'm kind of glossing over it in the beginning. So we can certainly spend more time considering making this isometric in its entirety. I would just have to do a little exploration to see if it's even feasible with the tile set that Reiner provides. So, because I have not used his tile set in that fashion before.
Nor have I, but he's got such great isometric models that we can use.
Right, and then it would match because he made his art match the color theming, because the coloring is a little bit off tier too. And I don't know about you guys, but I sense the colors don't quite work together. So
yeah.
Okay, so lots of traps and pickups, and one thing I didn't mention is there will be magical gates to exit the levels and move on to the next difficulty. So this will be a sequential game where it gets harder and harder. The goal is to collect items that you need to advance while staying alive, and the longer you stay alive, the harder the level gets, so you got to move quickly, and that's basically where we're going. So assuming that we know where we're going now, which I feel like we do, we can move on to actually developing the game.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Yeah, exactly. So this is our current, pardon me, this is our current game, which is less than the exploration, but it is fully coded in standard Corona. So you should be able to follow along. Sorry, I've got a problem here.
So just so I'm clear on what you're saying, early on we had said that there was the I guess pure Corona version, and then there were some exploration versions where you were going to use SSK so that you could quickly iterate through the different versions, and we could kind of play with things and then eventually come back to the pure play, just Corona version. So are you saying? So you're saying that right now what we're looking at now is just the pure play version?
Yes. So we're no longer looking at you're asking a good question that I should clarify on. We have the app folder under top-down shooter, which is the game we're working on. One of the folders here is config testing, folder 1, which is where we explored just the layout for desktop and the build settings file, config.lua. Exploration is where we were just at a moment ago. It's the one we've been looking at for the last couple of weeks, where I quickly used SSK to iterate over a bunch of different movement styles and camera types and just various other little tiny details that I didn't want to longhand code because it would take me too long to explore. And now, on the screen behind here, which you can't quite see, is the game folder. It's the third folder, folder 3 game. And that will contain a full game that we are going to be working on now week to week together, where I may take you back and show you something in the exploration kit and say this is the thing that we're going to put in, or I'll give like a hint at next week's show. But mostly we're going to be talking to this folder now. With the exception of some sprites talks we're going to do today to get people aligned on this, but bear with me for a moment.
Okay.
And in this folder, go ahead.
No, I was just saying okay to the original question. I think I'm clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to say what I've taken so far is if you look at the game folder, it's going to look a lot like the layout that we had for our last game. In fact, I took the last game and I stripped out all the parts I didn't need and left behind just a skeleton. So the last game was Monsters Need Coins. So that had some stuff already laid out for us. It had a common it had a common Lua. It had it had a sound Lua. So all that stuff is the same in the sense that it's the same files, and we're going to fill them in with different content. So it's very similar to the layout of our last game. There's a game Lua, which is the master one file for sort of setting up the game and producing all the right things at the right time to set up a level.
And you do that for efficiency's sake, right? So that you know that the next time that you put something together, or if you look back at some of your previous work, you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly where to find my files. I know what they're named. I know what they do.
Right. And I'm trying for as much as possible for the people who are watching these shows. I'm trying for consistency. I know that it's been sort of an up and down path here, or back and forth, however you want to think of it. But I think as we go along, the consistency will get better as far as how these games are laid out and structured. I can't keep them completely consistent because not all games are alike, but the major things like sound.lua and common.lua and game.lua, I can do that. That's definitely doable. So we're going to do that, and people will be able to quickly follow along as they do more and more of these shows and follow the code.
Okay. Yeah, and to be fair to you, there's probably a big difference between putting projects together for publishing a game than trying to put together the projects for walking people through the concepts and demonstrating how the code works. Right. So it's
absolutely. In fact, I would not even do some of these games quite the way I'm doing them, but I do some of these things a little bit longhand or split them out because otherwise it's just too hard for people to track and follow. And what's the point of doing it if people can't follow what I'm trying to show them? So last week, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but last week we talked about using the Reiner set, and I kind of gave a hint at, here's how you set up the sequences, and I said, here's some code to auto-generate a sequence without explaining what a sequence was. So this week, I'm going to show you what a sequence looks like longhand, and then quickly show you the generator again so you can see what's going on. So here, what we've got is the character from our last game, our main character. And as you can see, he's running the same animation using different time scales. And this animation is called right walk. Now, to set up this code, what I did is I took all these textures, which you see on the screen, and I put them in a sprite sheet using Texture Packer. So I just dumped them in Texture Packer and then exported to a file called Pinky. And then Texture Packer exported this sprite sheet and exported this Lua file, which contains information about the sprite sheet, including a list of frames, pardon me, including the location of the start of each image, how big that image was, etc. And then if we scroll down here, it has a short list of the names of each of the original textures and the frame that represents that or is that texture. So frame 1 is the jump texture, frame 2 is the stand, frame 3 is the first texture that goes in the walking animation, and there are 11 frames in the walking animation between 3 and 13. Now, this is a very short list. It's tractable in the sense that I can read it, understand it, see it all on one screen. So I don't need help creating a sequence. And when I say a sequence, what I'm talking about is this data right here, which is basically a table of tables where each subtable is outlining the details of a specific animation. For example, the idle animation has one frame, and that frame is 2. And if we look at our previous file here, that means we're going to use the standing texture, which is frame 2. And then the time doesn't matter because it's looped. There's only one frame, so you won't see any transition. So I just put the default of 1000. And a loop count of 0, which means it runs forever. Again, one frame, it doesn't matter. I could have put 1, 2, 3. You wouldn't notice the difference. And then a loop direction of forward, which means that it plays sequentially from the lowest ordered frame to the next one to the next. Similarly, the jump animation for this character was just one frame. So I have another table which is called jump, or it has an entry called jump. It has one frame, which is the first frame, which is P3 jump. And the same details on the time, loop count, loop direction. Now the interesting ones here are right walk and left walk. So right walk has a frame set that starts at 3, ends at 13, and I just typed them out. Now if I had wanted to change this up and maybe goof around with the animation or change the sequence, I could do that. I could put these frames first. Now, when I run it, it'll probably, yeah, so it looks a little bit different. It may be pretty subtle, but I would expect people to take a look at this code later and just mess with it and see what they get. But you can't really see it. But the frames have now, the sequence has changed, and it's interesting. It looks more like he's doing a skipping or something. So
Yeah, some weird jumping jacks, yeah.
So put that back. But the point is, this is very easy for me to write. I can understand it. It's no problem. But the writer set, on the other hand, had what, like 300 frames with all kinds of weird names, and 10 for this animation, 15 for this animation, 3 for the other animation. There was no way that I was going to type that up by hand and go back and forth looking at this file and going, okay, the next one is 10, the one after that's 22. You know, there's no guarantee they're going to be in order. They just get put in the list in any order the texture packer wants to. So what I did instead, we will just look at it again briefly. Let's load it up first so you can see it. So this is in 4 sprites, and then there are 2 subfolders, one called simple, the other one called complex. We just looked at simple. This is complex, and it's got the red zombie, and what we're seeing here is it's played in different scales and different directions. So this one's pointing down at an angle, this one's doing the attack, this one's getting hit, and this one is being destroyed over and over. And then finally the bottom one is walking, and I just randomly change the direction it's walking in every couple of seconds. But let me bring up the code. So we can see how much harder this is, or would be, to do if okay, so for this animation, we've got a sprite sheet with, I don't even know how many sprites this is. It's
a lot.
304 frames.
Good grief.
There's no way I'm going to go through this list, even if it's in English, because not all of them are in English for Reiners. So you've got to be like, it's in German. What's that word? I can't remember. But I'm not going through this list and typing out by hand every single animation sequence. Instead, what I've done is I have created a tool that generates that sequence. And it does it by having me pass in certain details, saying this subsequence name pointed in the north direction. And what it does is it creates these names. It composites these names. So, for example, if I passed in walking north as the sprite that I wanted to make, the sequence I wanted to make, it would be called walking here. That part would be replaced with that, and then north, and then for each frame it would be 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It does all the math, all the combining, and generates a table very much like the one we saw, but using an algorithm. So I have rewritten this since last week to make it even more compact and more easily understood. All of our sprite makers now use a sprite maker module, which they call, and to make any individual red zombie, green zombie, the archer is as simple as 30 lines of code, or approximately that long, and you can clearly see the first time you walk through it how this works. So, for example, the red zombie, I include the graphics sheet and the information file from Texture Packer. I pull out the details about the sheet into an image sheet. And then I set up a blank sequence data table. And then I know that this one has a number of different directions, north, south, east, west, northeast, etc. And then the animations that I want are walking, disintegrate, attack, and then hit. Walking, those animations each have 8 frames. I want it to take 800 milliseconds to play it, and I want them to play in a loop forever. So loops 0 means loop forever. The disintegrate has 9 frames. I want it to play in 900 milliseconds, and I want it to loop one time and stop. Attack, 11 frames, 1100 milliseconds. You get the idea. And so what I do is I take my table of directions, my table of animations with additional details, and I feed them into the generate sequence function from Sprite Maker, which you can take a look at, which does, let's just call it a little bit of magic, and creates those tables of subtables in the correct format, and then spits them out. And then I simply say if they want to create a zombie or archer, it calls the Sprite Maker create function and passes in the appropriate image sheet and sequence data table, which I generated above, and it's done. So I don't think this is going to clarify things greatly for people, but what I've given people is a very simple example they can look at that's outside of the context of the game, and they can compare that side by side to the simpler one, which was Pinky.
Well, I think the overall concept, right, is pretty easy to understand. Is that if you are going to write the code yourself and match up the sequences, then it's not that big a deal. But once you get to a sprite sheet that has 300 images, that becomes a much more tedious manual process. So you've created a tool to automate that process. So I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, going through the code and knowing that the nuts and bolts of it is probably a different conversation, but conceptually, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Texture Packer 1 isn't going to generate these things in the order that you would expect every time. I mean, it's great. I love the tool, but that's one of the things it does, and it's based on the alphabetized naming system of the textures themselves. So if the textures don't have good names, the sequence will come out in some strange order. However, you can easily extract that as long as you understand the structure and order of the names yourself. And so what I did was studied Reiner's textures, and I said, oh, I know how to break this down into parts. I'll break it down into parts and simply use an algorithm to generate the texture sequence I need based on my knowledge of the list of names.
Okay, so what I think I hear there then is that if you come across a different set of assets that are not organized in the same way that the Reiner stuff is, you may run into issues. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying exactly. What you need to do is you can't just there's no single solution that works for all problems. You need to understand the fundamentals, which is you look at simple and understand the basic concepts of how to set up sequence data. And once you understand that, then you're ready to go and tackle large sets of textures that are used in animations that may have various names and rules for ordering, and you have to understand the basics, and then you have to look at the more complicated one and understand where that person was coming from when they made that set of textures.
Stephen, do you know? Do you guys can you share? Do you guys have specialized tools? I mean, you don't have to give us details, but just a yay or nay that you have specialized tools in your game development for problems like this, for sequencing and animations. Uh-oh.
Well, no, there's noise in the background. That's all. We have artists, so they would be the ones to ask.
So they handle all that stuff, making sure that the naming is correct and that everything matches up and that things can be put into sequence easily.
Yeah, I'm sure they've got a process because we've already done a game before and we would have worked out some issues with that. So.
Okay. But you're not 100% sure if you have a specialized tool for that, or if you have, I mean, you have to create something in house, or was it something off the shelf that you guys use?
We've got a lot. It's an art thing, so I'm
okay. That's okay. I know that's on the art side. You don't do.
So, Stephen, I was going to say that to answer Charles's question to you is, when I've worked with companies, generally the way we did it is I would create a rule set, and they would give it to their artists, like naming conventions and orders and stuff, and then the artist would follow that and give me feedback on, I need this or I need that. We'd work in concert until we had our special naming convention and sequence of doing these things, so that it was easy to just pump them out. But the problem for me is when I tell people on this show, here's how you do it, they're going to go, okay, Reiner's works this way, but then somebody else's, they work a different way, and everybody thinks differently when they create these assets. So I can't create a single universal solution, unfortunately, that just figures out the right sequence for all these.
Well, but I think that's important to know, though. I mean, it's like just knowing it, right? Just knowing that when you get to this point, here's what you're going to encounter. I think saves people a lot of stress and time, because now they understand everything that's involved in the production of the thing. So, so yeah, it's good to know.
Actually, you made me think of something. People should definitely take a look at this and experiment with this, and then go grab some of other Reiner's packs and go through the sequence, because what they're going to find is even Reiner did not follow his own naming rules all the time. So I think it's going to be a really good lesson for people who are trying to learn how to make sprites. Just play around with as many Reiner's kits and this base code that I've given you until you understand the concept, because you come out of there after you're doing 5 or 6 and you will have a solid grasp of how this works.
And also, I mean, anybody who's new to the Corona, there are sample apps that come when you download the SDK. You can break open those and look at those as well. So the assets have been provided, the code is there, the documentation. If you go to the docs, docs.coronalabs.com, you can find documentation on it, and it talks about the sequencing steps for sequencing and things like that. So it doesn't go into how to automatically sequence 300 individual frames, but it covers that concept just like you did with the simple Pinky version. So
yeah, I mean, you gotta. I think I've said it before, but the whole sprite making thing is so complicated, and there's so many options that you got to work through it until you understand each individual one. You can't just expect people to sort of pick it up and go, yeah, that's how it works.
And also, as a side note on that last example, or not the last example, but the previous, the simple example, you were showing that the idle animation only had 1 frame, and somebody might ask, well, why is that I only have 1 frame and the other animations have multiple frames? And the simple answer to that is that, well, that's just the way that was, right? The artist decided that the character would just simply stand there, whereas the characters you have on screen right now, the idle state is there's a little bit more motion to it.
He's got like 8 frames where his arm's moving back and forth.
Yeah, so he's standing there, but he's not standing there motionless.
He's doing the what's this? There's a name for this in 3D games, which is the I can't remember. If anybody remember it, there's a special name for the animation where he stands there, but he's moving a little bit. So it gives
hero
that
pose.
sense. What? Say again?
The hero pose or the vine pose? Or?
Yeah, I can't remember. That's not it. That's not the one I'm thinking of, anyways.
Okay.
No, not your bad. It's fine. It's all right. I don't remember it either. Okay, so I've totally run us out of time, but I'm going to do it anyways. We're gonna take a quick tour of this game. I just want people. We're going to keep going on this next week, obviously, But I won't be wasting anybody's time next week. More side discussions are going to go right into the game. But
I would hardly call any of this a waste of time.
well, it's
I know you want to
not so
be
much a
further
waste
down the
of
road.
time, but I had my own personal goals for the show, and I'm way behind my goals. So, when you get into it, it's really hard to stay on track with timing, or to know how long it's going to take. But I just wanted to show people, this is in the game folder again, 3 Underboard Game. The 3 files that you want to look at right away are main, game, and common. Main has the very same setup we've always had, or we've had frequently now, which is I set up some stuff about the display. I turn off the display bar. I set up the multi-touch, turn on multi-touch. I should be clearing setting the VBuff so that the output comes out right away. I set a seed for my random generator. It's always important to do that, otherwise you're going to get the same sequence over and over for your games. This little bit here is for SSK, which I'm still using. I know I said I'm not going to, but I'm using it temporarily. But the final version of our game, I'll be doing this, and it will still work. This is just, I leave it in here as a crutch for me, because SSK has a few tools that I like to use as I'm developing, like dumping out tables and doing extended prints of tables and stuff like that. So I need that for my development, but I'm not going to be doing anything that requires SSK other than that. Common, which is the file I told you that's interesting today and will be interesting in the future. I also included scripts windowing, so that's from our previous project, which is basically it's a file that handles all the Control-Enter to go full screen, Control-Enter to go back to windowed mode. I will go over the whole thing later. Just know that it exists at this point. The only other thing we do in main is we start physics, we load it, we start it, we set gravity to 0, and if I wished, I could put on hybrid mode, and I would get the the pretty extra little details that tell me that I'm using a circular body for my character, and that's about the only thing with physics at this point. So we'll go ahead and turn it off. I initialized a sound library, which I'm not using yet, but I just leave it in there. It's working already. I took it from the last game, so no need to change that. Then I load the game module, the other interesting file for today. That is, so I loaded sound, I init sound, and then I call create, and I'm passing in a 1. At this point, create doesn't care about anything, so we'll take that out. The create is in game Lua. Now, there's a little thing here at the top, which I will tell you what it is, but I won't go into why we're using it quite yet. It's I'm using this little bit up here for what I call input or event coalescing. I've talked about this on the show before. The mouse input is a noisy input. So when I say noisy, what I mean is the more you move the mouse, the more events you get. And you can literally get dozens of events per frame. So if you're doing something on each of these events, you could be wasting CPU power doing nothing useful, because it's not going to get rendered until the next frame. So I coalesce noisy events, and I will go into how that works later, but at the top of the file, basically what I am doing is counting. I have my own personal frame counter. It's not related to the frame rate, it's just frame 0, frame 1, frame, just goes on forever. It counts up until 4 billion and then wraps around. So hopefully nobody plays this game for 4 billion frames and then proves that it doesn't wrap, but it gets negative or something, I don't know. But the point is this gives me a number to refer to further on in the code for doing some kind of calculation related to coalescing, which is a topic we'll talk about later. At the top here, as before, I require all of the different scripts and modules that I'll be using. And there are quite a number in this game already. We have physics, which we use. This is, Corona. The sound module, which we're not using, but we will be. Common. And then we have Sprite Maker, the Zombie Makers, the Archer Maker, the Arrow Maker, the Lost Garden Pack, our camera module, and Math 2D, which is coming out of the plugin set. So I will be using my Math2D library and my collision calculator because those are now available as plugins. So that's within the realm of reason. There's documentation. It's available. People should be able to use it. I should be able to use it. There will be many modules in this game because I'm making builder modules, which is these makers, for every different trap and enemy, etc., etc. So there's going to be a number of them. But the beauty of desktop is, maybe you didn't see that number earlier. When I was running the exploration, we're already up to 60 megs of texture memory. We have lots and lots of memory, so we're good to go. So having lots of modules, no big deal. The next bit, same as previous games. I like to declare my variables and do a little bit of forward declaration of functions. Currently, there are none. This is where I declare a function name before I define the body so that I can use it throughout the file. That would be here. Localizations, something I like to do and I encourage people to do, which is where you take a function that you're going to use a lot and you either make a shorthand local, like the mrand is my shorthand for math random, or because I use pairs a lot, I localize it. Now you wouldn't think this would be a big deal, but and for desktop maybe not so much, but for mobile, simply doing this at the top of your file, if you use pairs a lot, can actually save you a significant amount of execution, because it doesn't have to do the remote lookup for this every time. It does it once, and it's there, and so it doesn't have to continually look up this function out of the global set. So it's a little tiny optimization, but if you do it 10 million times, you saved yourself some time. So, or if you call it 10 million times. So, let's see what else. The vector library, which I told you we were going to use. I like to make shorthand names for each of these. So math2d add is add vector, subtract vector, vector to angle, etc. And then we get into the code. The first bit of code is the destroy method. Now in previous games I used to put this down at the bottom of the file, but it kind of makes more sense to me now to put it at the top, because almost always when I call create, I first call destroy, because the first time I do it, destroy will do nothing. But if I do a create and then I change the level and I want to create a new level, I got to go destroy the previous one. So if I'm calling destroy first, I might as well put it at the top of the file. And also, I found coding-wise that destroy is usually pretty short. It's got very few things in it, like I destroyed the group that contains all the display layers here. Then I set that variable to nil. I started a new list of arrows, some stuff like that. And that's about it. It's going to be just maybe, when we get done with this, I'm going to estimate this will be about 20 to 30 lines long. The thing is, I always do this when I'm making games. I do some work, I create some variable that I know I'm going to have to clean up later, and then I'm like, okay, I'll remember to do that later. Instead, I should just go right away and type it into destroy and go, okay, I made some Beelzebub, or let's call it Bob because I can't remember how to spell Beelzebub. I made a variable named Bob that I know I'm going to need to nil out when I destroy. So let's just do it now. The reason I'm lazy about this is usually because I put destroy someplace weird, and I'm like, oh, I got to go search for it. But if I know it's at the top of the file, it's very easy to find. So my lesson here is, if you've got a function that you're going to edit all the time, put it someplace where you can find it.
You're encouraging good behavior.
I am encouraging good behavior because there have been times when I had to go back and re-edit these examples long after we released them, because I found my laziness had caused a problem. And so I don't want people to go through that. It's just, you don't want to have released your game and then remember, I forgot, did I remember to clear out those variables? No, I did not. And then you get a bug report and you're like, why is that happening? Oh, it's because I was lazy. I didn't test it enough. Okay, the next one's the big one, create. Now, it's got some variables here that we're not using, a level number and a group. We may change this later. I just left it because I copied it from our last game. But what we do here is we create a display group I'm going to use display current stage by default, which is the group at the top, the one that contains everything. And then, as I said, I call destroy. Now, the first time through, that will do nothing useful, but it still executes, doesn't do anything bad. The next thing I do is I create a complex sequence of groups that are nested in such a way that will allow me to render everything I need for our game. So if I want to have a background texture that does not move, I can have that as the bottom layer in the background group. Then we're going to have a camera, and we're not going to be able to do it today, but our camera is going to need a group that has layers inside of it to handle moving the player and the other content and keeping it all aligned. And so what I've chosen to do is create a group called World, and within that I have Underlay, which is the bottom layer, Content, which is the middle layer where most things go. For example, Underlay will contain all the textures for the ground, whereas the player and the arrows and the bad guys will all go in Content. And then if let's say I add some clouds or just some random thing that needs to be over both of those other ones, I would put that in Overlay. All of these are a child of World. So if World moves, these move. That's the key. We'll come back to that later, but that's how basically cameras work. Is you move a group that contains groups, and everything within those groups moves at once. Moves 10 to the left, 10 to the right, up and down. And we'll come back to it. We've talked about cameras before, but one thing that we're doing that's differently this time is I'm giving you guys a module, which is just a plain Jane camera, from which you can learn to write your own camera modules instead of using SSK or some complicated one like previously. The only other layer we have here is the interfaces layer for things like the score counter and buttons that must always float above the world, not be part of the content, not be part of the camera, and so that's what that layer is for. And then I will let people read through this code, but I've shown you in this little comment here the layering from bottom to top and the nesting. And then you should read through these and see what I've done as far as creation and insertion to verify for yourself that I am in fact creating this hierarchy by following these steps. This is one of the things that new developers don't understand, which is they can change the layering order simply by inserting groups within groups or to front, to back, etc. Those calls. And so that's what I'm doing here to get the hierarchy that I've shown. Okay, so there's not much left here. The only thing we got so far is the reticle and the player. So I create a reticle and I create a player, and I'm using some some functions within Game Lua, which are further down. We're not going to talk about them today because there won't be time. But next week we will launch into this part, which is basically creating the reticle, which we've talked about a little bit before. But I'll show it in the context of this game. And then creating player, and the big thing that we'll be learning next week is how to deal with pointing at the reticle, making sure the player faces the reticle, and walks forward in the direction that he is facing at the time that you press the forward key on your keyboard, which is W. And that is it. All the rest of the stuff is for next week.
Excellent.
So
excellent. Exciting. I'm looking forward to
get people in here. They can start looking at it now and tearing it apart.
Yeah.
I won't tell you how the rest works until next week.
Which they should be. I mean, the link to this will be in the show notes, so you can download the code and go back through, look at it yourself. If there's something you don't understand, go back and watch the video. But yeah, from between now and then, you should be taking a look at the code and seeing how it all. And go ahead and read ahead. Just like in school, in college or high school or whatever. You read ahead. That way you'll be prepared for the next class, and you can ask questions or whatever in the comments, and we'll go from there. Awesome. This is shaping up to be good. I'm interested. I tell you what, you piqued my curiosity when you talked about having portals where we could jump between the levels and stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to be able to jump back and forth between levels in this game.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that piece. I'm kind of I mean, the cameras are definitely something that we needed to cover. Being able to move the player around.
Yeah, the basic stuff. But
yeah.
the inner level stuff is something we've never done before.
And that's why I like I like these series that we do. You know, each one has its own personality. There's something new that we cover that you could certainly go back and watch any one of the mobile development series that we've done so far and get some of these concepts and then come back here and just keep going, right? You just build on top of your base of knowledge. So I like it. I like it a lot. All right,
So,
sir. Well,
can I
thank
say
you.
one more thing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this week was a mad rush. I think to this point we've been doing sort of like a mad rushing, and I've been like, look at this, and this piece of code does that, and this is this decision. We've hit the point now where we are settled down, so if people are feeling like this is too fast for them, it's going to slow down next week. Next week, we're going to be taking a close look at each element and focusing on that element. So, yes, I will give clues and hints to upcoming features, but I realize that this series has probably been a little bit hard to follow at times, so I'm going to slow down enough so that people really get a grasp of the individual concepts we're working on.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and do download the code and go through it because you can't replace that element of things. You know, you can explain this stuff until you're blue in the face. But until somebody downloads the code and just goes in and messes with the values and sees what the result is, it's not really going to be, not really building the neurons in their brain that they need to. And so download the code, play with it. Worst case scenario is you got a zip file on your desktop, right, that you have to unzip again because you screwed everything up.
Yeah, break it. By all means, break it. I encourage people to break this code over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, break it, and then try to and then take a moment to try to figure out what you broke. Right, and how to fix it, because that's invaluable as well. But if you can't, and you don't, spend too much time, you can always just unzip the thing and start over again. It's no big deal.
It's not like I'm going to delete the file after you download it.
Yeah, this is the Etch-a-Sketch of code.
No, you can only download it once. Sorry, that's it. One-time downloads only.
Right. Yeah, the fully open source model. You can only download it once.
That's right. That's the instant download model.
Right. That's the boss level. All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here. We'll be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific. We will continue our desktop series, and like I said, go over to youtube.com/coronageek and find all the other videos there. And while you're online, while you're at your computer, go to burtonsmediagroup.com. Go to roaminggamer.com. And then also go to babastudios.com, which I'm not probably still pronouncing that right, but there will be links in the show notes, and you can find it there. So go and check all of those out because we got a great brain trust here on the panel, and they do some great stuff. All right, until next week, have a great time and happy coding.
Adios.
Bye.